son she named Samuel and gave him to a priest named Eli to raise. And when he was 16, one night Samuel heard the voice of God calling him by name, but he thought it was Eli. So Samuel woke him up 3 times in the middle of the night before Eli realized it must be God calling. So he told Samuel that if you hear the voice again, just say, "Here I am." Samuel did. And he grew to become one of the greatest prophets in Israel, in history. But the people wanted more power, more respect, and so they demanded he name a king for them. He was concerned and reluctant, but Samuel chose Saul. He was a handsome young man who stood a foot taller than the rest. And at first, Saul was a great leader, and he led 12 disorganized, feuding tribes to win a succession of victories over their impossible enemy, the Philistines. But all that praise and adulation went to his head, and he soon began acting as though he was above the law. And this greatly angered God. So God told Samuel to find someone else that would replace Saul one day. And Samuel, Saul, who was it? Samuel, of course, chose David, right? The sweet little shepherd boy, the youngest of 8 brothers, talented musician who liked to chase butterflies and daydream. You remember how one day he brought lunch to his brothers on the battlefield and discovered that no one would dare go up against a giant named Goliath, and how he said, "I'll do it," and pulled a slingshot out of his pocket and killed him with 1 stone. And then, sweet little boy, cut the guy's head off, brought it to King Saul, who praised him for his heroism. At a banquet in his honor, David met Saul's oldest son, Jonathan, and there was an immediate bond, and they established a covenant that is one of the greatest love stories in the Bible. Meanwhile, Saul's moods swung between madness and paranoia, and he became wildly jealous. The people loved David, and his son Jonathan loved David, and his daughter Michal loved David. And it's the only place in the entire Bible where it records that a woman loved a man. Now, Saul thought he could exploit his daughter's love as a weakness. And so publicly, Saul praised David, but behind his back, he plotted to kill him. An accident, of course, in the tragedy of war. Saul made a grand gesture of promising his daughter Merab to David if he won an impossible battle. And of course he did. But Saul told David when he came back expecting to marry Merab, "Oops, I've already married her to somebody else. But here, you can have Michal. If you bring back the foreskins of 100 Philistines, who, to say the least, were not going to give those up willingly." And ever the overachiever, David came back with 200, and Saul had no choice but to keep his promise. So there's our quick recap. But here we are now. David handed Saul 200 foreskins. And I have questions like, did he give him a basket full of them, or how did that work out? And Michal became David's first wife. That is, until she wasn't. She was taken away and married off to another man named Palti. And that is until all of a sudden, David, some years later, wanted her back and brought her to Jerusalem, where by that time she joined as perhaps his 7th wife, but still considered the first. Except that she was also married to Palti, who was so broken by all this. He was so heartbroken that he followed behind the caravan all the way to Jerusalem, we're told, crying and wailing the whole way The poor guy. And I'll say again, soap opera writers need to read the Bible for inspiration and story ideas. So, back and forth she went upon, which helps explain why in today's scripture, Michal looked down from a window and seethed. She watched her husband leading a procession in front of the Ark of the Covenant, also known as the Chest of God. He's dancing nearly naked, and she, quote, despised him in her heart. Partly hurt by how she'd been treated. Perhaps she also knew this was a stunt. One part, great love for the Lord, and one part, political theater. You see, David brought the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem because he wanted to cement his authority as king by having their most important religious symbol in his possession, in his new city of David. Michal, both hurt and cynical, confronted his indecent exposure, essentially a loincloth, and for the shocking how he shocked the delicate sensibilities of the ladies. All these words dripping with sarcasm and contempt. And David simply responded, I'll dance for the Lord if I want to dance for the Lord. But he did more than retort. He punished her for her comments, and we're told he refused to sleep with her. Maybe she refused to sleep with him. I want to give him equal opportunity there. Either way, though, she died childless, surrounded only by her cats. Now, the expectation is that we will see Michal as a tragic character. Poor Michal. But I prefer to think of her as complex and compelling. I mean, what a fascinating woman. We'll look a little more at her story. But I'll ask, have you ever heard of this woman before? Some of you have. It's remarkable that we even know her name. And a pawn, yes, or at least maybe, but she's so much more than a pawn. Because first of all, she's assigned agency as the only woman in the Bible about whom we are told she loved a man, which was recognized as a power which her father tried to exploit. And secondly, she's clever. For example, here's a story. During one of her father's murderous rages, King Saul orders his henchmen to find David and bring him in. They came to the house, and when they arrived, she helped David escape through a window and then answered the door. And she whispered, "He has a terrible cold." And she pointed to the bedroom. He's resting. But to prove it, she motioned them to the bedroom so they could look for themselves and showed them a bed that she had filled with straw to make it look like he was asleep. And they left. Now, that was a truly brave act. She took a politically astute and calculated risk to protect David from her father, which is something David did not return in kind. She saved his life, and her reward was his disappearance. Never saw him again. That is, until years later when he changed his mind and took her away from a man who actually loved her dearly. So all this is what's happening before it is that she dared confront her husband, angry about this treatment, skeptical that his motives to move the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem were totally authentic, and accusing her of scandalous behavior. Now, a part you didn't hear is she initially was looking down from the window at what he was doing out there. And I'm thinking, well, wouldn't a wife or a harem of wives be expected to attend such an event? Why wouldn't she have been there? And was it perhaps a quiet act of resistance that she refused to attend? So, clever, astute, brave, a risk taker, outspoken. Now, you should read the way that male commentators describe her, calling her essentially the equivalent of a nasty woman, emotionally cold, a social climber, selfish, self-centered, and proud. Michal thought only of herself. Now, commentators would call these virtues if they were describing a man. Such characterizations of her are completely absent from the text and can only be described as blatant, naked sexism. And even, sadly, Walter Brueggemann suggests that Michal either can't understand or refuse to acknowledge that David's just showing his love for the Lord. But Michal has seen too much, and she won't be silent. Consequences and all. She is complex, and I find her compelling. A three-dimensional character. And what do you know? Very much like each of us. Now you may ask, why do I keep telling these stories of such obscure people? Particularly these stories of women. And one, because it's important to say their name. Right? In worship, to say their name, to give them their story. And two, it's important to call out sexist behavior for what it is, the attempt to diminish and demean, to make invisible then and now. Three, to state the obvious that great heroes like David are real people with mixed motives, just like us, capable of great love and terrible deceit, and nevertheless dearly loved by God. And as many of you know, it gets worse. And today we heard the name Nathan. He's introduced. You know that powerful men like to surround themselves with sycophants and court jesters and yes men to get whatever they want, so that keeps them in close proximity to power. Nathan is no such fool. His story will come. And fourth, we can honor David and any hero, but remember that only God is worthy of worship. Expecting too much of any human will surely disappoint, because only God can save us. I like Michal, and I think she demonstrates that we all have power to exercise, even in the most limited of circumstances. And I'm wondering if today you might feel stuck about something. There have been plenty of times in my life I just felt stuck, as though I had no choices. What are the choices you actually do have? With both choices we make and choices that are imposed upon us, we retain dignity. So claim your power to be clever and brave and outspoken. God, transform all these words and thoughts